Hello and welcome. Find a place where you can rest and allow your mind to become still. As my voice reaches you on this evening, I invite you to share your own time and place in a quiet comment below. To be gently notified of our future journeys into the past, you might also consider subscribing to our community. It is a peaceful thought to know we are all sharing this stillness together across the hours and the miles. Tonight, our journey takes us not to a place that can be found on any modern map, but to a location that exists now only in the quiet archives of history and in the vast landscape of our imagination. We are traveling back across more than 2 millennia to a city of light and learning, and to the intellectual heart of the ancient world. We are going to Alexandria, and we are here to visit its greatest treasure, the legendary Great Library. This was more than a collection of scrolls. It was a revolutionary idea, a monumental declaration that all the knowledge of the world, every poem, every play, every philosophical treatise, every medical and astronomical discovery could and should be gathered under one roof. It was a sanctuary for the human mind, a testament to the power of curiosity and the patient, quiet work of preservation. We will not speak of its famous, tragic end. The story of fire and loss is a loud one, and our purpose here is quiet. Instead, we will perform a kind of gentle archaeology of the mind. We will walk the halls of the library as if it still stands. We will listen to the soft rustle of papyrus, breathe in the dry, sweet scent of ancient knowledge, and observe the slow, methodical work of the scholars and scribes who dedicated their lives to this grand project. Join me as we arrive at the bustling port and begin our slow walk towards the silent, sunlit halls of the Great Library of Alexandria. Our journey begins, as it would have for any ancient traveler, by sea. Imagine the feeling of being on a wooden ship, gliding across the deep, wine-dark blue of the Mediterranean. For days, the only sight has been the endless horizon. Then a lookout calls, a shape appears in the distance. At first, it is just a pale column against the sky, but as the ship draws closer, it resolves into the impossible form of the Pharos, the great lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Its light has guided us here, a promise of safe harbor, a beacon of civilization. As our ship navigates into the bustling great harbor, the full sensory experience of Alexandria washes over us. The air, once clean and salty, now becomes thick with the smells of a global crossroads. The sharp scent of cedar wood from the ships of Phoenicia, the sweet, heavy aroma of spices from the Arabian caravans, the earthy smell of grain from the vast plains of Egypt, and the ever-present scent of fish, salt, and damp rope from the harbor itself. The sounds are a symphony of 100 languages. The sharp commands of Greek sailors, the guttural bartering of Egyptian merchants, the lyrical cadence of Hebrew scholars, the formal tones of a Roman diplomat. It is a city that speaks in every tongue of the known world. We disembark onto the quay, our feet finding solid ground. The city before us is a marvel of Hellenistic design, a vision of order and ambition conceived by Alexander the Great and built by his successors, the Ptolemies. Unlike the ancient, winding cities of the Old World, Alexandria is laid out in a logical, geometric grid. Broad parallel avenues, wide enough for chariots to pass, are lined with brilliant, whitewashed buildings and colonnades of marble that gleam in the African sun. But we are not here for the commerce or the crowds. Our destination lies in a more refined and secluded part of the city. We make our way from the harbor towards the Canopic Gate, the main entrance to the most prestigious district of Alexandria, the Bruchion, the royal quarter. As we walk, the sounds of the city begin to change. The loud bartering of the marketplaces fades behind us, replaced by the gentle clip-clop of horses drawing the carriages of nobles, and the low murmur of philosophical debate from men in simple robes. The air itself seems to change. The thick, heavy scents of the harbor give way to the delicate perfume of cultivated flowers and the cool, green smell of watered gardens that lie behind high stone walls. This is the neighborhood of palaces, of temples, of gymnasia, and of kings. The architecture is grand, a fusion of Greek form and Egyptian scale. We walk along shaded colonnades, their marble columns providing a cool respite from the Mediterranean sun. The play of light and shadow is a rhythmic, calming pattern that slows our pace. We pass statues of the Ptolemaic kings and queens, and of the Greek gods and goddesses who were the patrons of their dynasty. Everything here speaks of order, of wealth, and of a deep and abiding respect for culture and learning. This entire district was conceived as a single great campus, an environment intentionally designed to foster the life of the mind. There is a palpable sense of peace, of purpose. The noise and the dust of the outer world have been left behind. We have passed through a symbolic gateway, leaving the world of commerce for the world of contemplation. We are now within the sacred precinct of knowledge. And somewhere ahead, nestled among the gardens and the temples, lies the object of our pilgrimage, the quiet heart of this entire enterprise, the Mausoleum and its great library. Before we arrive at the library itself, we must first understand the institution of which it was a part. The great library did not stand alone. It was the most famous component of a larger revolutionary establishment known as the Mausoleum. Our slow walk through the royal quarter now brings us before its entrance. There is no grand, intimidating gate, but rather an open and inviting series of colonnades, beckoning the visitor into a world of scholarly peace. The Mausoleum was the brainchild of the first Ptolemaic king, Ptolemy I Soter, a former general of Alexander the Great. He wished to establish his new capital not just as a center of power, but as the intellectual heir to Athens. On the advice of the exiled Athenian philosopher Demetrius of Phaleron, he founded the Mausoleum, which translates as the Shrine of the Muses. It was a name that invoked the 9 Greek goddesses of the arts and sciences, and it was a direct tribute to the school of Aristotle in Athens, the Lyceum. But the Mausoleum was something new. It was arguably the world's first government-funded research institute. Its resident scholars, who may have numbered up to 100 at its peak, were not freelance teachers who had to worry about attracting students or patrons. They were invited by the king, and upon accepting, they became salaried fellows. They were given free board, lodging, and servants, and were exempt from paying taxes. Their only duty was to pursue knowledge for its own sake, to think, to research, to write, and to debate. This state-sponsored freedom of inquiry was a radical and powerful idea, and it attracted the greatest minds from every corner of the Hellenistic world. Let us step inside. The first thing we notice is the architectural centerpiece of the complex, the peripatos, a long, magnificent, covered walkway. Imagine a corridor of towering marble columns, open to the air on one side, looking out onto a lush, serene garden. The floor is a mosaic of polished stone, cool underfoot. The roof provides a deep and welcome shade from the sun. This was the artery of the Mausoleum. Here, scholars would stroll in pairs or small groups, their simple linen robes rustling softly. They were following the tradition of the peripatetic school of Aristotle, who taught his students while walking. The peripatos was a space designed for conversation, for the slow unfolding of an idea, for the rhythm of walking to set the pace for the rhythm of thought. From the walkway, we see other buildings. There's a great communal dining hall, the Sycition, where all the scholars would gather for their meals. Imagine a large, airy room, filled not with boisterous chatter, but with the low, civilized murmur of quiet conversation. The meals were simple but sufficient, the atmosphere one of collegial community. It was here that a geographer might share a table with a poet, a physician with a mathematician, allowing for the cross-pollination of ideas. There were also lecture halls, or exedre, rooms with raised seating where a scholar might present his latest findings to his peers. We might imagine a room where a physician, having been granted the rare and controversial permission to perform anatomical dissections, explains the workings of the human nervous system. In another, an astronomer explains his calculations based on observations made from the small astronomical observatory that was also part of the complex. The entire Mausoleum was a self-contained ecosystem designed to nurture the intellect. It had botanical gardens for the study of plants, and a zoological park for the study of exotic animals sent from the far reaches of the Ptolemaic kingdom. It was a place of deep, systemic inquiry into the nature of the world. The scholars who lived and worked here were the living heart of the institution. But even they knew that their own minds, as brilliant as they were finite. The true, enduring soul of the Mausoleum, its claim to immortality, was the vast, collective memory it was building next door, the Great Library. We now leave the sunlit gardens of the Mausoleum and approach the entrance to the Great Library itself. The building, like the others in the royal quarter, is likely of brilliant white marble, its design a masterpiece of Greek architectural principles, balance, harmony, and proportion. As we step across the threshold, we experience a series of immediate sensory shifts. The first is temperature. The thick stone walls and high ceilings create a space that is significantly cooler than the warm air outside, a welcome and calming change. The second is the sound. The gentle noises of the garden, the birds, the fountains, the distant voices fall away completely, replaced by a profound and reverent silence. It is not an empty silence, but a silence filled with a latent energy, the quiet hum of thousands upon thousands of stored thoughts. The third and most distinct change is the smell. It is a scent that, once experienced, is never forgotten. It is the dry, sweet, slightly dusty perfume of old papyrus. It is a clean, organic smell, the scent of preserved knowledge, the aroma of history itself. And then our eyes adjust to the soft, diffused light, and we see it. The great hall. The scale is breathtaking. The ceiling is high above us, perhaps supported by rows of tall, fluted columns of polished marble. Light filters in from high, clear-story windows, designed to illuminate the space without allowing the harsh, direct rays of the sun to damage the precious contents. The room is a vast, quiet, and sacred space. But it is the contents that overwhelm the senses, lining every wall, and perhaps standing in great, freestanding rows in the center of the hall, are the bibliothecae. These are the bookshelves, but they look nothing like the ones we know today. They are great honeycomb structures of dark, polished cedarwood, divided into hundreds of small, rectangular pigeonholes. And in each pigeonhole, resting on its side, is a scroll. There are thousands of them, tens of thousands. In this hall alone, perhaps hundreds of thousands. They are a river of papyrus, a silent, motionless ocean of text. They are of varying sizes. Some are slender, containing a single book of epic poetry. Others are thick and heavy, containing a dense philosophical treatise. Most are a pale, creamy white or light tan color, the natural shade of the papyri from which they are made. From the end of each scroll, a small white tag of parchment or leather hangs down. This is the syllabus. On it, written in small, neat Greek letters, is the name of the author and the title of the work contained within. As a gentle draft of air moves through the vast hall, these thousands of tags might sway ever so slightly, the only movement in the entire still landscape of knowledge. The effect is one of immense, ordered, and almost terrifying scale. Every great thought of the ancient world, every poem, every play, every history, every scientific theory is here, resting in its designated place. The tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides, the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, the histories of Herodotus and Thucydides, the medical texts of Hippocrates. and countless other works from cultures across the known world, whose names and contents are now lost to us forever. There are only a few other people in this vast space, and their presence only serves to heighten the sense of scale and quiet. At a simple wooden reading desk, a scholar with a long gray beard sits, his entire being focused on a scroll he has carefully unrolled before him. He is a small human island in an ocean of text. In the distance, a librarian, a figure known as a bibliophilax, or guardian of books, walks silently between the racks, his soft leather sandals making no sound on the polished floor. He might pause, consult a note, and retrieve a single scroll for a reader, his movements economical and full of reverence. To stand in this hall is to feel the full weight and wonder of human history and creativity. It is to feel a profound sense of humility in the face of so much accumulated wisdom. It is to understand that this is not just a building containing books. It is a sanctuary, a statement, and a bold attempt to build a memory for all of humankind. The Great Library was not a static archive, a sealed vessel of existing knowledge. It was a living, breathing, and profoundly hungry organism. Its mission, set forth by the first Ptolemaic kings, was nothing less than to acquire a copy of every single book in the entire known world. This was an undertaking of unprecedented scale, and it required a system of acquisition that was as ambitious and relentless as the library itself. The story of how a scroll arrived on the shelves is a fascinating journey in itself. One of the primary sources was the harbor we first visited. Alexandria was the greatest commercial hub of the Mediterranean, and hundreds of ships a month would dock here, their holds filled with wine, grain, pottery, and timber. But the agents of the library were not interested in these common goods. They were treasure hunters of a different sort. By royal decree of Ptolemy III, every single vessel that docked in the port of Alexandria was subject to a unique and rather startling inspection. Officials, on behalf of the library, had the right to search the ship not for contraband, but for books. Any scroll found aboard, whether it was part of the ship's cargo or the captain's private property, was to be confiscated. Imagine the scene. A ship's captain, having just completed a long voyage from Athens, is met at the dock by a quiet, scholarly official. He is not asked about his cargo, but about his book chest. His collection of scrolls, perhaps a copy of Homer's Odyssey he reads on long voyages, a new play by Menander, a treatise on navigation, are politely but firmly taken into the possession of the library. This was not an act of theft, but a state-sponsored policy of intellectual appropriation. The mission to accumulate all knowledge was considered a matter of royal and civic pride, overriding any claims of private ownership. These newly acquired scrolls were not taken directly to the Great Library. They were first brought to a special scriptorium and workshop near the harbor. Here, a team of scribes, employed specifically for this purpose, would immediately set to work. A fresh roll of high-quality papyrus would be prepared, and the original text would be meticulously copied. The process was done with great speed and skill. Once the copy was complete, it was this new version, created in the library's own workshops, that was returned to the perplexed ship's captain. The original, often older and more valuable scroll was kept by the library. It was given a special designation from the ships and was then sent on its final journey up to the royal quarter to be formally accessioned into the grand collection. This aggressive policy was not the only method of acquisition. The Ptolemies also dispatched royal agents and emissaries across the Hellenistic world with enormous sums of money. Their task was to visit the great book markets of Athens and Rhodes and to purchase any and all texts that the library did not already possess. They were empowered to buy entire private libraries from collectors, securing vast swaths of literature and philosophy in a single transaction. Perhaps the most famous story of acquisition illustrates the lengths to which the Ptolemies would go. The city of Athens possessed the official, state-sanctioned master copies of the great tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. These were considered a national treasure. Ptolemy III wrote to the Athenians and asked to borrow them for copying, offering to pay a massive security deposit of 15 talents of silver, a truly astronomical sum. The Athenians, tempted by the fee and trusting in the surety, agreed. Ptolemy had the master scrolls brought to Alexandria, where his finest scribes created exquisitely beautiful copies on the highest quality papyrus. He then sent these brand new copies back to Athens and gracefully forfeited his entire 15-talent deposit, keeping the priceless originals for the great library. Through these methods, compulsory acquisition, aggressive purchasing, and clever diplomacy, the collection grew at an astonishing rate. Carts filled with new scrolls would have been a regular sight, making the quiet, triumphant journey from the harbor to the royal quarter. Each one was a new tributary of thought, a new stream of knowledge flowing into the ever-expanding ocean of the great library. A scroll has arrived at the library. It is an original, perhaps a unique copy of a forgotten play or a new work of philosophy. Before it can be made available to the scholars, it must be copied. This ensures the preservation of the work should the original be damaged, and it allows for multiple copies to exist. We now enter one of the quietest and most important spaces in the entire complex, the scriptorium, the domain of the scribe. Here, knowledge was not just stored. It was physically reborn, letter by letter, through a slow, patient, and deeply focused craft. Let us first consider the canvas for this work, the papyrus scroll itself. The creation of this beautiful writing surface was a craft perfected over millennia in Egypt. It begins in the marshy wetlands of the Nile Delta, with the harvesting of the papyrus reed. Imagine the workers standing in the shallow water, cutting the tall, triangular stalks. The outer green rind is peeled away, revealing the creamy white pith within. This pith is then sliced into long, thin, translucent strips. These strips are then laid upon a wet board, their edges slightly overlapping. A second layer of strips is then placed on top, at a right angle to the first, creating a crosshatch grid. This double-layered sheet is then covered with a linen cloth and pressed or hammered, the natural starches in the plant's pith acting as a glue, bonding the two layers together into a single, cohesive sheet. After being dried in the sun, its surface is polished with a smooth stone or a piece of ivory until it is perfectly smooth, ready to receive the ink. To create a long scroll, many of these individual sheets would be glued together, end to end, and then rolled around a wooden dowel. Now, let us turn to the scribe himself. Imagine him at his low desk. He sits on a cushion, his posture straight, his demeanor one of absolute concentration. Before him are his simple, elegant tools. His ink is melon, a deep, permanent black, made from carbon. It was created by collecting the fine soot from the burning of oil lamps or pitch pine, which was then mixed with a binder, typically gum arabic, and pressed into a small, dry cake. To use it, the scribe would simply touch a wet brush to the cake to liquefy a small amount of ink. His pen, the calamos, is not a feather quill, but a reed harvested from the same riverbanks as the papyrus. He has carefully carved its tip to a fine, sharp point and slid it down the middle to allow the ink to flow smoothly. Beside him is a ruler and a lead disc for scoring faint, straight guidelines onto the papyrus, and a small sponge for correcting any minor errors. His work begins. He takes the original scroll, the one to be copied, and carefully unrolls a small section with his left hand. With his right hand, he takes up his reed pen, dips it in the ink, and begins to write on the fresh blank scroll before him. The sound is one of the most peaceful in the ancient world, the soft, rhythmic scratch of the reed pen moving across the fibrous surface of the papyrus. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It is the sound of a thought being given a physical body. The script he writes is scriptio continua. There are no spaces between words, no punctuation as we know it. no distinction between upper and lowercase letters. A line of text is an unbroken stream of characters. This required immense focus from the scribe, who had to mentally separate the words as he wrote, and would later require the same focus from the scholar who read it. He writes in neat, parallel columns, slowly filling the blank space with the ordered beauty of the Greek alphabet. As he completes a column, he gently pulls the blank scroll towards him with his left hand, revealing a new surface, and rolls the now-filled portion away with his right. This was a slow, painstaking, and physically demanding task. A scribe might work for hours, his back aching, his eyes straining. His world shrunk to the tip of his pen, and the next letter to be formed. They were the anonymous, essential artisans of the ancient intellectual world. They were not composing new thoughts, but they were performing a task just as vital. They were the guardians of transmission, the human conduits through which the knowledge of the past was carried, letter by patient letter, into the future. To stand within the great hall was to be in the presence of a near infinity of knowledge. Here, perhaps 500,000 scrolls lay waiting in their alcoves. The complete works of the great Athenian playwrights, the foundational texts of philosophy, histories of forgotten kings, treatises on medicine, mathematics, and the stars. An ocean of human thought, gathered and preserved. But this very success created a profound and daunting challenge. A collection of this size without a system is not a library. It is a labyrinth, a warehouse, a chaotic sea of papyrus in which any single thought, any specific work would be lost forever. How could a scholar find the single scroll they needed? How would a librarian know if they possessed all the works of a certain author, or if their copy of a text was complete? Knowledge gathered is not the same as knowledge made accessible. The great physical project of building the library required an equally great intellectual project, the creation of order. This monumental task fell to a man who was not a mere administrator, but one of the leading literary figures of his age, the poet and scholar Callimachus of Cyrene. Around the middle of the 3rd century BC, while working at the library, though he may never have held the title of head librarian, he undertook a project that would change the history of information forever. He decided to create a map, a comprehensive guide to the entire landscape of Greek literature and learning held within those walls. His work was called the Paineix. The name is unassuming, translating simply as the tablets or the lists, but its ambition was anything but simple. It was to be the first great catalog of Western knowledge. Imagine the scale of the labor. Callimachus and his assistants would have had to handle, unroll, and examine every single one of the tens of thousands of scrolls in the collection. The work was not just clerical, it was critical. For each scroll, they had to determine the author, the authenticity of the work, and its proper title, as many scrolls had different or inconsistent titles. It was a colossal feat of scholarly detective work. Once a work was identified, it had to be classified. Callimachus devised a system, a great tree of knowledge that branched out to contain the whole of literature. First, he created the great divisions. There were writers of verse and writers of prose. This was the first fundamental split. Then, within these divisions, he created the subdivisions, the genres that we still recognize today. Under poetry, he created sections for epic, for elegiac, for iambic, for lyric, for tragic, and for comic plays. Under prose, he created sections for history, for rhetoric, for philosophy, for medicine, and for law. For the first time, the chaotic ocean of literature was being channeled into great logical rivers. Within each of these genres, he then organized the authors alphabetically. This simple, elegant solution was a revolution in information access. Once the author was placed, Callimachus created a detailed entry, a small biography for the writer. It would include their father's name, their place of birth, any famous teachers they may have had, and a brief note on their field of work. Then came the list of the author's known works. For each individual work, the entry contained two vital pieces of information. The first was the incipit, the very first line of the text. This was a stroke of genius. In a world with no standardized titles, the first line was a unique fingerprint, a way to distinguish different versions or editions of the same work. The second piece of information was a line count, a simple number telling the reader the length of the scroll. This helped identify incomplete works and gave the scholar a sense of the text's scale. The final result, the Pine Eggs, was a massive bibliographic work in its own right, said to have filled 120 books of papyrus. It was a library dedicated to understanding the library. It was the invention of bibliography, of the literary canon, of the very idea that knowledge could be mapped, structured, and navigated. And this grand, intellectual map had its physical key, the small parchment tag, the syllabus, that hung from the end of each scroll. This tag contained the essential information, the author, the title. A scholar can now consult the Pine Eggs to identify all the known works of Plato, for example. They would then walk into the philosophy section of the Great Hall and scan the hundreds of hanging tags, their eyes searching for the name Pi Lambda Tau Omega Nu. The work of Callimachus was the quiet, invisible scaffolding that made the great library truly functional. It was a triumph not of conquest or of architecture, but of the patient, logical, and tireless application of the human mind. He and his assistants did not write new poems or discover new stars. They performed a perhaps greater service. They took a universe of accumulated knowledge and gave it an order, a memory, and a map, ensuring that the light of the past could be navigated by the scholars of the present and preserved for the minds of the future. The great library and its parent, the Mausoleum, were more than just buildings. They were a community. The scholars who worked here were not daily commuters. They were resident fellows, living a privileged and structured life dedicated entirely to the pursuit of knowledge. To understand the soul of the library, it helps to walk for a day in the soft-soled sandals of one such scholar. Let us imagine a man, perhaps a geographer from Rhodes or a philosopher from Athens, and follow the quiet, predictable rhythm of his day. His day begins, like the butlers in another age, before the city is fully awake. The light in his small, clean chamber is the cool, pale gray of the pre-dawn. His room is simple, furnished only with a bed, a small table, a stool, and a chest for his belongings. It is not a place of luxury, but of quiet contemplation. He rises and performs his morning ablutions, the cool water a gentle awakening. He dresses not in elaborate finery, but in a simple, clean linen chiton, the standard robe of a Greek scholar. He makes his way not to a private kitchen, but to the great communal dining hall of the Mausoleum, the Sicilian. Here, he joins his colleagues for a simple breakfast, perhaps some bread, olives, a piece of goat cheese, and a cup of watered wine. The mood is not boisterous, but one of quiet collegiality. A mathematician might be silently reviewing a formula in his mind. Two poets might be having a low, metered conversation about a line of Homer. Our geographer might exchange a quiet greeting with an astronomer, sharing a brief observation about the clarity of the previous night sky. It is a gentle start to a day of intense mental labor. After the meal, the serious work begins. He walks from the dining hall, perhaps along the sun-dappled colonnade of the Peripatos, and enters the profound silence of the great hall of the library. The air is cool, and the scent of old papyrus greets him like a familiar friend. He does not wander the aisles himself. He approaches one of the librarians, the bibliophalax, and makes his request. He is continuing his research on the accounts of travelers to India, and he needs to consult a specific set of scrolls by the explorer Megasthenes. The librarian bows slightly and disappears into the vast forest of scrolls. Our scholar finds an empty reading desk, a simple, sloping wooden surface in a well-lit part of the hall. He prepares his own tools, a blank roll of fresh papyrus for taking notes. his ink cake and reed pen, and a few small, smooth stones to use as weights to hold the scroll he is reading open. The librarian returns with the requested scrolls. Our scholar gives a nod of thanks and begins his work. He carefully unties the small cord that binds the scroll and, using both hands, begins to unroll it from the left while rolling up the right side. His eyes scan the dense columns of Greek text, his mind absorbing the information. When he finds a pertinent passage, a description of a river, an account of a local custom, he pauses. He takes up his own reed pen, and in his neat, scholarly hand, he copies the passage onto his own sheet of notes. For hours, this is his entire world. The rustle of the papyrus, the scratch of his pen, the text before him, and the great cathedral-like silence of the hall. There are no clocks to mark the passage of time, only the slow movement of the sun as the bars of light from the high windows creep across the stone floor. His work is slow, meticulous, and deeply focused. He is in a quiet dialogue with a mind from another generation, another land, his own thoughts building upon the foundations of those who came before him. As the sun reaches its zenith, he may feel the need for a change. He carefully rolls up the scrolls, ties them, and returns them to the librarian station. He then makes his way out of the great hall and into the gardens of the Mausian. Here, under the shade of a fig tree or beside a trickling fountain, he might meet a colleague. They begin to walk along the peripatos, the covered walkway. And here, the solitary internal work of the morning transforms into the external communal work of the afternoon. He discusses what he has read, testing his ideas against the mind of his friend. They might engage in a gentle Socratic debate, questioning assumptions, refining arguments. This walk, this conversation, is as much a part of the research process as the silent reading. It is where raw information is forged into true understanding. As evening approaches, he returns to the secession for the evening meal, his mind full of the day's work. The conversation might be more lively now, but it is still the talk of scholars. After dinner, he does not seek out the entertainments of the city. He returns to his simple room. By the soft, flickering light of a single oil lamp, he unrolls his own notes from the day, reviewing his work, organizing his thoughts, and preparing his mind for the questions he will seek to answer when the sun rises on another quiet, predictable, and perfectly constructed day in the service of the muses. The daily routine of the scholars provided the structure, but what was the substance of their work? What great intellectual labors were being undertaken in these quiet halls? The great library was not just a repository. It was a crucible of thought where the knowledge of the past was tested, refined, and used to build new and revolutionary understandings of the world. The work was often slow, abstract, and required immense feats of pure contemplation. Let us imagine one of the most famous figures associated with the Mausian, the geometer Euclid. We see him not as a teacher in a bustling classroom, but as a solitary scholar at a reading desk. He is not, for the most part, creating new mathematics from scratch. He is, instead, engaged in one of the most formidable intellectual tasks imaginable, the work of synthesis. He has gathered before him all the significant mathematical treatises held by the library, the works of Pythagoras, of Thales, of Plato's Academy. These scrolls contain hundreds of years of brilliant, but often disorganized geometric discoveries. One scroll might contain a clever proof about the nature of triangles, another a theorem about circles, a third a treatise on proportion. Euclid's genius was to see the deep, underlying connections between them all. His work is a slow, patient process of editing. He unrolls a scroll and studies a proof. Is it rigorous? Is it elegant? Can it be stated more clearly? He takes up his own reed pen and begins to write on a fresh sheet of papyrus. He starts not with a complex problem, but with the very simplest of foundations, a set of 23 definitions. A point is that which has no part. A line is breadthless length. From these simple, self-evident seeds, he sets out to build the entire universe of geometry. He works through the existing theorems, one by one, discarding flawed proofs, refining elegant ones, and creating new ones where none existed. He arranges them in a perfect logical sequence, so that each new proposition is built securely upon the ones that came before it. The work requires almost no physical equipment, just papyrus, ink, a straight edge, and a compass. The true laboratory is the quiet, ordered space of his own mind. The result of this immense, quiet labor is The Elements, a 13-book masterpiece of logical rigor that would remain the foundational textbook of mathematics for over 2,000 years. It was a product not of a single flash of insight, but of a lifetime of slow, quiet, and deeply focused contemplation, made possible by the vast intellectual resources of the library. Now let us imagine another great mind at work, the third head librarian, Eratosthenes. He was a true polymath, a poet, a historian, a mathematician, and a geographer. One day, he is reading a scroll in the library, an account from the city of Syene, in southern Egypt. He reads a curious observation in Syene. On the day of the summer solstice, the midday sun shines directly down a deep well, meaning the sun is precisely overhead. Eratosthenes, a keen observer, knows this is not true in Alexandria. Here, at the same day and time, a vertical object like an obelisk still casts a small but measurable shadow. In this small discrepancy, his brilliant, synthetic mind sees a grand opportunity. He realizes that the curvature of the earth is the cause. If he knows the angle of that shadow in Alexandria and the distance between Alexandria and Syene, he can calculate the circumference of the entire planet. The work is a model of elegant scientific simplicity. On the summer solstice, he goes out into a courtyard of the Mausian. He uses a simple gnomona vertical staff and measures the angle of its shadow at noon. It is about 7 degrees, or roughly 1/50th of the circumference of a circle. The second piece of information he needs is the distance. He cannot measure it himself, so he turns to the library's vast administrative records. He finds the official measurements recorded by the royal bimettists, the professional surveyors who paced out the king's highways for military and tax purposes. The distance is recorded as 5,000 stadia. Now he returns to his study. With these 2 pieces of information and the simple geometry perfected by his colleague Euclid, he performs his calculation. 5,000 stadia multiplied by 50, the result, 250,000 stadia. His calculation, when converted into modern units, is astonishingly close to the true circumference of the earth. He had, with a stick, a shadow, a piece of information from a scroll, and the power of pure reason, measured the world. This was the true magic of a library, not the turning of lead to gold, but the turning of simple, quiet observation and preserved knowledge into a profound understanding of the cosmos. The work of the mind, as practiced in the great library, was an intense and demanding pursuit. The hours spent hunched over a scroll, deciphering ancient texts or forging new lines of thought, required a powerful counterpoint. The architects of the Mausian understood this well. They knew that a mind, to be truly productive, needs not just a space for work, but also a space for rest, for conversation, and for aimless, gentle thought. This space was found in the gardens and the great covered walkway, the peripatos. Let us take a slow, quiet walk through these restorative landscapes. We step out from the cool, silent halls of the library into the warm, fragrant air of a cultivated garden. The sudden brightness of the sun is softened by the shade of tall palm and sycamore trees. The air is alive with a new set of sounds. The gentle splash and trickle of water from a marble fountain at the garden center. The low, contented hum of bees moving between the blossoms of a flowering hibiscus. The distant, musical call of a hoopoe bird. It is a carefully curated soundscape designed to soothe the mind. The garden is a living library in its own right, a botanical collection to complement the papyrus one. Scholars of medicine and biology would walk here, observing the exotic plants and herbs gathered from the far reaches of the Ptolemaic Empire. We might see a scholar sitting on a simple stone bench under the deep shade of a fig tree, not reading, but simply gazing at the patterns of light filtering through the leaves. It is in these moments of unstructured quiet, of not working, that the mind is often able to make its most creative leaps. The solution to a difficult geometric proof, or the right turn of phrase for a line of poetry, might arise not from intense effort, but from this gentle release. From the garden, we step into the cool shade of the Peripatos, the famous covered walkway that framed the complex. The change is once again immediate. The warm sun gives way to a cool, refreshing shade. Our footsteps, silent on the soft earth of the garden, now make a soft, rhythmic tapping sound on the polished mosaic floor. The Peripatos is a space of elegant repetition. A long, seemingly endless line of fluted marble columns march beside us. They create a hypnotic rhythm of light and shadow, a calming, predictable pattern that is conducive to a walking meditation. On one side, the columns are open to the sights and sounds of the garden. On the other, a solid wall is adorned with frescoes, perhaps depicting the 9 muses, the patrons of this institution. This was the space for dialogue. We can imagine 2 scholars, perhaps our geographer and our astronomer from the morning meal, now strolling side by side at a slow and measured pace. Their heads are bent together in quiet conversation. Here, ideas born from solitary reading were shared, tested, and refined. The rhythm of their walking would match the rhythm of their speech. A difficult point might be punctuated by a pause in their steps. A new insight might cause their pace to quicken slightly. The Peripatos was the intellectual artery of the Mausian. It was a space that was neither fully inside nor fully outside. It was both a place of movement and a place of stillness. It was the physical embodiment of the peripatetic tradition of Aristotle, a testament to the belief that the mind is sharpest when the body is in gentle motion. It was the necessary exhalation after the deep inhalation of study, the place where the silent, internal work of the library was given a quiet, human voice. The great library in the royal quarter was the brilliant, scholarly heart of the Ptolemaic intellectual project. But it was not the only great collection of books in the city. To fully understand the reach of Alexandria's literary world, our journey must take us away from the quiet, privileged enclave of the Bruchian and into the older, more populous Egyptian district of Rhodotus. Here, upon a man-made hill, stood a magnificent temple complex, and within it, a second great library. This was the daughter library housed in the Serapeum. The journey itself is a study in contrasts. We leave the orderly, Greek-inspired grid of the royal quarter and enter a more ancient part of the city. The sounds become louder, the smells more earthy, the architecture shifts. Here we see the monumental scale of pharaonic Egypt fused with Greek aesthetics. At the center of it all is the great temple of Serapis. Serapis was a unique deity, a masterful creation of the Ptolemies designed to unite their Greek and Egyptian subjects. He was a composite god, blending the Egyptian Osiris and the sacred Apis bull with the Greek gods Zeus, Hades, and Asclepius. His temple was one of the most splendid in the entire ancient world. We ascend a grand staircase of 100 steps, an architectural proclamation of the sanctity of the place. As we enter the temple precinct, the atmosphere is entirely different from that of the Mausian. The air is thick with the sweet, heavy scent of burning incense. The sounds are not of quiet, scholarly debate, but of the low, rhythmic chanting of priests and the prayers of the faithful. The Mausian was a secular space dedicated to the muses. The Serapeum was a sacred space dedicated to a god. Within this sacred complex was the daughter library. It was established by Ptolemy III, in part because the Great Library was literally running out of space for its vast and ever-growing collection. The Serapeum became the home for overflow scrolls and for the numerous copies that were made of the most important works. But it was more than a mere storage facility. It was a major public library in its own right, perhaps more accessible to the general literate population of Alexandria, the more exclusive, research-oriented Great Library. Here, a young student, a lawyer, or a poetry enthusiast might come to consult a text. The collection was vast, by some accounts numbering over 40,000 scrolls. Imagine the reading rooms here. They would have been integrated with the temple's architecture, perhaps long colonnaded halls surrounding a central courtyard. The atmosphere would have been one of divine reverence. To read a text here was not just an intellectual act, but a spiritual one conducted in the house of a god. The librarians here may well have been priests of the cult of Serapis, serving as both spiritual guides and guardians of the scrolls. The existence of the daughter library is a testament to the sheer scale of the Ptolemaic ambition. The goal was not just to create a single elite research center, but to saturate the entire city with knowledge and literature. The Great Library was the heart, the engine of new research and preservation. The Serapeum was the public face, the great circulatory system that brought that knowledge to a wider audience. Together, they formed an ecosystem of learning unparalleled in the ancient world, two great beacons of light in a single brilliant city. For 12 chapters, we have spoken of a world of knowledge, of a river of text. But all of this, the poetry, the history, the science, was entrusted to a single, humble, and profoundly fragile medium. To understand the Great Library, we must understand the physical body that carried its soul. We must understand the nature of papyrus. Let us look closely at a scroll. It is a beautiful object. When new, its color is a creamy, warm off-white, the color of dried reeds in the sun. It is light, yet strong. It can be rolled and unrolled 1,000 times if handled with care. A scholar would hold it in both hands, unrolling from the right, reading the columns of text, and rolling up the left side as they progressed. At the end of the scroll, a wooden dowel, the omphalos, provided a handle and a spine. For a time, it was the most perfect medium for writing ever devised, and the monopoly on its production was a source of great wealth for Egypt. But its beauty was a fleeting one. Papyrus is an organic material. It is, at its heart, a form of paper made from a water reed. And like all things born of the natural world, it is subject to decay. The librarians of Alexandria were not just scholars and catalogers. They were engaged in a constant, quiet, and ultimately losing battle against entropy. Its greatest enemy was moisture. The very air of Alexandria, a bustling port city on the Mediterranean, was humid. This dampness was a mortal threat. In a humid environment, papyrus acts like a sponge. It can swell, its fibers can separate, and it becomes a fertile ground for the growth of mold and mildew, which would stain the pages and consume the ink, turning a priceless text into a pulpy, illegible mass. The great stone walls of the library were designed not just for grandeur, but to create a stable, dry interior environment. Its second enemy was its opposite, dryness. In a climate that was too arid, or if exposed to too much heat from the sun, the papyrus would lose its natural moisture and flexibility. It would become brittle and fragile. A scroll that became too dry would crack and crumble at the slightest touch. The act of unrolling it to read would be an act of destruction, the page flaking away into a pile of indecipherable dust. The librarians had to maintain a delicate, almost impossible balance of humidity. Then there were the living threats. The bookworm is not a myth. The larvae of various beetles and other insects found a rolled-up scroll to be a perfect home and a source of food. They would burrow into the scroll from its edge, chewing through the layers, creating tunnels that would obliterate letters and words, leaving a trail of destruction through a line of poetry or a historical account. And finally, there was the simple act of use. Every time a scholar unrolled a scroll to study it, every time its surface was touched by hands, every time it was rolled back up, a tiny microscopic amount of damage was done. The fibers would weaken, the edges would fray. The most popular and important works, the ones that were read again and again, were literally being loved to death. This inherent fragility meant that the library could never be a static museum. It had to be a place of constant renewal. The scribes in the scriptorium were not just copying newly acquired texts. Their most important work was recopying the library's own collection. An old, fraying copy of Plato would be carefully duplicated onto a fresh new roll of papyrus, giving it another century or two of life. This endless, patient work of transcription was the only thing that stood against the inevitable, quiet decay of time. The library was a constant, heroic effort to hold back the tide of impermanence, to give the fleeting thoughts of humankind a home that was just a little more permanent than the minds that had conceived them. Our slow tour is now at its end. The sun is setting over Alexandria. The last scholar has left the great hall. The librarians have completed their final tasks. A profound and final quiet settles over the thousands of scrolls, each one a sleeping mind, a silent voice from the past. Let us take one last look at this world before we let it gently fade. The story of the library's end is a loud and confused one, full of fire and conflict, told and retold over centuries. But the true end of the library was not a single dramatic event. It was a slow, quiet fading, like the papyrus itself. It was a decline that lasted hundreds of years, a story of dwindling funds, of political neglect, of the slow, inevitable decay we have just contemplated. The final fire was merely the last sigh of a body that had long been failing. But if we focus on the fire, we miss the point. The true legacy of the Library of Alexandria was never the building. The stone and marble could fall. The true legacy was not even the scrolls themselves. The papyrus could turn to dust. The true, indestructible legacy of the great library was the idea. It was a revolutionary and breathtakingly ambitious idea that all the knowledge of all the world's peoples could be, and should be, gathered together in one place, preserved, organized, and studied. It was the idea that knowledge was not the private property of a king or a priest, but a universal inheritance for all of humankind. This idea was too powerful to be contained in a single building or on a single shoreline. Even as the great library itself faded, the seeds of its mission had already scattered across the world. Scholars who had studied in its halls returned to their own lands, carrying with them copies of its texts and, more importantly, its intellectual spirit. The knowledge it had hoarded was copied and recopied, translated from Greek into Latin, into Arabic, into Syriac. Visuals, a slow, beautiful montage of dissolving images, a great library in ancient Rome, a scholar in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, a monk in a medieval European scriptorium, a page from a Gutenberg Bible, the shelves of a modern university library. The echo of Alexandria resonated through the ages. We can hear it in the great libraries of Rome and Constantinople that sought to emulate it. We can see it in the incredible work of the scholars of the Islamic Golden Age, who preserved and built upon the Greek knowledge they had translated. We can see it in the quiet, patient work of the monks in medieval scriptoria, who, like the scribes of Alexandria, kept the light of knowledge alive through a dark and fragmented age. The invention of the printing press was a new kind of library, one that could store 1,000 copies in 1,000 different places. The great universities and national libraries that arose in the Enlightenment were all born from the same Alexandrian ideal. Every small public library in every small town, with its mission to provide free access to knowledge for all, is a direct, living descendant of the dream of the Ptolemies. Today, we are attempting to build our own kind of great library, a digital one, a vast and chaotic network of information that spans the globe. We face the same challenges they did. How do we gather it all? How do we preserve it? And most importantly, how do we create order and find wisdom within the infinite noise? The stones of the Mausian are gone. The papyrus has long since crumbled into dust. But the core idea, the lingering quintessence of the great library, remains. It is an echo in the mind of civilization, a quiet but persistent whisper that reminds us of the profound, sacred, and deeply human impulse to learn, to remember, and to share. It is a story that has no end. And so the last light is extinguished. The great house is now an island of perfect, unbroken dark. The clocks, set in motion by a single hand, tick on in the silence, measuring the slow, deep hours of the night. The silver rests, gleaming in its felt-lined drawers. The wine sleeps in the cool of the cellar. The day, with all its intricate rituals and quiet duties, is complete. The silent service is over until the dawn, and now it is time for your own day to come to a gentle close. Let the deep quiet of the house be your quiet. Let its order be your peace. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to see, only rest. Sleep well,